Welcome to the Domestic Abuse Project's podcast. This is our second episode. My name is Amirthini. I'm the executive director.
My name is Naajee Dennis. I'm the victim survivor supervisor and youth program supervisor.
All right, and we are really excited to have you here. You recently released your book, Just Sam, A Black Man's Journey to Healing, and you have a long and successful career as an alcohol and drug counselor and behavioral consultant. You developed and managed a curriculum for African American men and boys aimed at promoting healthy and nonviolent relationships. And you currently host a community empowerment through Black Men's Healing Conference.
Yes.
But when I was reading your book, I think one of the things that I loved about it was that it's very much like having a conversation with you. There's a lot of heavy topics in it, but I was saying, as we were talking before we started, that there's also a lot of laughter, a lot of lightness while you're talking through a lot of heaviness,
Right.
a lot of trauma. And it's just a very personal way of talking about a very community-oriented and very public topic that a lot of people don't talk about.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about who you are
Right.
and what led you to writing the book.
As you said, I'm Sam Simmons, and I'm a behavioral consultant, licensed competency counselor, and been doing working with men, particularly Black men, with a focus on Black men for about 35 years or so. I also have a background in pain management. Did that for 20 years. Right now, I'm kind of semi-retired. When I say semi, because folks won't leave me alone. But I want I want to thank you for allowing me to be on your show and to talk with you. Without support from organizations like yours and the young folks that hang out with me, I don't think the book would have ever happened. So
Glad to have you. Very necessary to have you in community. So
yeah, well, I'm glad you say that.
So with your book, what do you hope people take away from reading it and better understanding about you and community and domestic violence?
Well, first of all, it says Just Sam on it. So a lot of times the question is it autobiography? Not really, right? It's really looking at the idea that if you address male trauma, and in this instance, Black male trauma, would that start a community to heal? Right, and because my work really wasn't just about Black men, like the conference, that's Community Empowerment Through Black Men Healing Conference, was not really just about Black men. But the idea was that when we talk about issues in the Black community, if we're not talking about the systematic oppression, the next thing comes up is what Black men are not doing, right? And so my whole thing is, I'm one of them kind of guys, if there's a problem, let's go to the hard part first, the more clear part. And so we started having this conversation about Black men and their trauma, and with the idea that if you don't allow a whole group of folks to talk about their trauma, why are you surprised when they're harmful to themselves and others, right? And really what elevated that conversation is my conversations with your grandfather, James Muhammad, and James Martin, whatever it is this week.
Shady.
Yeah. No, he ain't gonna like that. But much respect. And we in terms of the conference, we co-started the conference. But back to the book is based on that idea around the trauma and community trauma. And so in writing the book, the reason, it's when we talk about Just Sam, one of the things I've learned in terms of speaking about the subject is if I include stories from my family, it makes it more real for folks.
In your book and in the conferences and the lectures that you do, you talk a lot about historical trauma.
Right.
And the value of talking about that and learning about that and giving people space to share that in
Right.
relation to Black men and mental health.
Right.
Can you share more about why that's important?
Well, the thing is in terms of the historical trauma piece, the first time I heard about historical trauma was through one of my indigenous colleagues, and was led to a work by Dr. Braveheart, who talked about historical trauma from the indigenous community, right? And it, because I've always said, how do I talk about trauma of the Black community when it's something that we don't like talking about, right? And how do I do that and make it make sense? And the way she talked about the Native American community trauma, which, starting with, the original white communities come in and that part and what kind of effect they had on the community as a whole, and how that ends up affecting the community in terms of how it responds in the future. So it was really, I found it empowering, because basically what they're saying is, okay, why do we ignore our humanity by ignoring our trauma, right? We've had all, because people always want to talk about, when they would talk about the indigenous community, about, chemical use, child abuse, and all these other negative kind of behaviors. But now you step back and it's like, if you abuse a whole community over this length, 400 or 500 years or longer, what do you, as a human being, if we don't never get to address the trauma, and you've done such a great job of making us feel guilty about our trauma, right?
Yep.
And so talking about historical trauma takes away the guilt and said, this happened. This is real. And these responses are real. So now if we address that trauma, then it no longer becomes a yoke around my neck in terms of us moving forward. And if you look at the indigenous community over, because that's been about 15 years or so, that really got to take hold. And you see the strength in the community coming back. Is like that yoke of the trauma and feeling guilty about something that somebody else done to you. So that encouraged me, and I always want to give the indigenous community their props. Without that, I don't know how I would talk, right? Because we don't always give each other props, okay? So I took that framework and then plugged in our history. And I'm only talking about the history from the time we as Black folks, enslaved Africans came to the American colonies, which we say 1619, but we can argue about that in terms of some other dates. But, because people say, well, we had a history before we got here, and that's fine, okay? You're right. But not addressing that history of being basically the only community that came to America in the bottom of a boat, okay? We're not immigrants. And so that's significant, right? And sometimes, and for some reason, that's hard for folks to talk about, and it's even harder for us to talk about. Because again, we done been so conditioned to be ashamed of a trauma that was being put upon us that we don't talk about it, which in turns causes us to have behaviors that are traumatizing within the community to each other, okay? And so this inspired me to start putting the history pieces together, history points. You can't do all the history points, but slavery, Jim Crow, the civil rights movement, or the response to the civil rights movement, and then you get to the era of the crack era, as I call it, and how significant that has, those different hits that the community was, because we're always trying to heal, and then we take another hit, and how many hits can a community take, right? And that whole idea of being resilient, what does that really mean? If we look at, recovering, how often can you recover? When do you get to thrive? Because nobody should, be resilient for 500 years or 400 years and not have a chance to thrive, right? And so, so that's the premise around that. But we started to focus with men because that's the one that always pop up to the top. But it's really about the whole community, right? Where if men, I remember when we did the first conference, that was almost like controversial. Where people like, black men healing. What you mean? Black men was like, what you trying to say there's something wrong with me or whatever? No, man, as a human being, if these things happen to you, it's okay to talk about this trauma.
Yep.
Right? And so one of my female colleagues came up to me and she says, I hear you having this conference called Black Men Healing. I don't know what we mean, Black Men Healing. I'm the one that should be healing as much pain they cause us, And this is somebody who professional, had 2 sons. One of them was at that time a professional basketball player in the NBA. The other one was in college, so she did well by those boys, right? But you could still see that pain that was going on in her to the point where it's like, when you start talking about it, just struck a nerve in her, right? And I said, okay, I have a question for you. I said, you have a couple sons. I said, do you and you love them? Do you think it would be important to learn about their trauma? Right? And I said, secondly, if black men start being accountable for addressing their own trauma, then you won't have to be in a position to feel like you have to take care of them and you can have time to deal with yours.
That's right.
Because historically, black women have been put in the position to always put that man's trauma, in this patriarchal system ahead of theirs. Let me take a back seat and let you be the lead.
Yeah.
Right? And because of that, many times they become traumatized by trying to support them and not always getting the credit. We can look at throughout history where if you really study black women in terms of these significant spots where they weren't talked about, you dig behind it, they were, without their support, a lot of this stuff would never happen. A lot of these belief systems was built on their back, right? Where they had to, continue to, diminish themselves to elevate their man in this whole patriarchal system of him being the head and the lead and all these other kind of things. And so if I could deal with my trauma, right, then I will be more open to hear yours.
Yeah. And one of the concepts that you talk about is compassionate accountability.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that and how you get there?
Well, yeah, the idea of compassionate accountability is really an ideal that no matter how professional we are, no matter who we are, we don't like everybody. And I'm real clear about that with my clients. My job is not to necessarily like you. My job is not to harm you. And you can harm people when you're not being honest with yourself. So so you deal with people that you might feel comfortable with, familiar with, and then you might deal with people that are so different from you, you don't like them. And then you got some people you just make you uncomfortable. If you're not paying attention to that, you will put them in categories. Right, so compassionate accountability really is, a lot of it is really focused on facilitators, and is also focused on individual people. So everybody has that, and so you hear a lot. If you pay attention and really examine like the news media and stuff like that, And when we're, because we have experienced a lot of issues around car thefts and all these other kind of stuff by young people, right? And if a lot of times the folks who pop up on the screen might be persons of color. We don't know if they're whatever, but persons of color. So you get this vision because America is very visual, And when we talk about, so you notice that some groups, they keep talking about accountability, right? And so accountability without compassion is usually not fair, right? And gets to the point where you get pompous, you get full of yourself, or it's all about the person who's in power. Because think about when we're talking about politicians, the politician talking about, tough on crime.
Yep.
Okay. Then who are we talking about? Then you get the little code words, right? And so again, if I only look at you with accountability, so if you have a traffic stop, one person you may get out the car and get on the ground, same traffic stop for the same reason.
Yep.
The other one you have a conversation with. It might let them go because you're comfortable with them, or they're from your pack, your group, right? So the thing is, what we don't realize is that if you do accountability without compassion, actually you make that person that you're dealing with trauma even worse. Because now they've been re-traumatized. It really was came to light even more. With George Floyd. Everybody was talking about how awful that was, and you had this man killed on TV and all like that, and they would say, well, that's not every police officer. We have good ones. That's just out of the character. And it irritated me so bad that I put a thing on with a little old man. No, actually, I put a thing where my picture and a bunch of cracks going through the picture. And I said, the police officer, and these were real situations, the police officer who stopped me with my grandkids in the car, right, and chastised me about where you going and is this your car, I got personalized license plates, by the way, on my car, so that's a whole nother crazy thing. And then tell me, after you done did all this in front of my grandkids, have a nice day, is he considered a good cop? So the cracks to my soul, even though I'm still alive, still have harm. Because since I'm not dead, that makes him okay. And I've had that happen, because I'm an old man.
Yep.
So I've had that happen. To this day, if a car get behind me, it's like, oh God. Because I've actually recently had a police officer stop me out in the suburbs, which I don't go out there at night. It's like folks don't want to come in the city at night. Who stopped me, reached in my car and turned my lights out and said I didn't have my lights on. Okay? Because I was out, because they could tell, who was in the car. And okay, we're gonna stop them. And it just happened to be you got this old dude who got all kind of license and that kind of stuff. But again, why'd you stop me? Well, you didn't have. And when I thought about it, it's like, why he reached down and then said I didn't have my license. My lights come on automatically. Now that was recently.
Messed up.
Right? So when we talk about that, accountability and that kind of, and there are gonna be folks that, I think that's just an extreme. Well, I done had enough, out of character. Maybe I've been alive too long, because some of us don't live that long as black men. That's a whole nother conversation. But that's part of it. Now, on the other side, if you have compassion without accountability, that causes chaos. And that usually is just as bad, because even when you say accountability without compassion, we're talking about othering people, right? Well, compassion without accountability is a different type of othering. It's emotional othering. Because so you come from the same group of people, and I feel for you, and I got to make up because the system is awful, and so I got to give you an extra break. And that's okay, I guess, because we all do it. We're human. But when you're giving me so much breaks, but you give me breaks in a way that don't help me be better, you're not doing me no favors.
Yeah, we talk about that as fragilizing.
Right.
Yeah, you spoke to like the cracks of the soul, right?
Right.
And I was just really wondering about the historical trauma piece between Black men and Black women in relationship, right? And what role does that historical trauma have in not being able to Black males' trauma, be only seeing themselves as the victim,
Right.
Rather than being able to also see the pain that he's caused her.
Right. Well, the thing is it's hard to see each other's pain. Because even though in cases, yeah, he's going to always, because of his in terms of the physical piece, he's always going to be on top of that, right? Especially when you don't have the skills verbally to talk, right? And you get frustrated. And again, the thing is there'll be people out there, because I've been in the field of domestic violence for a long time and used to irritate a lot of people by talking about Black male trauma, because it's like sometimes when you deem one group a perpetrator and one group a victim without no question and no conversation, then you get people responding, well, why are you talking about history? No, wait a minute. These are two individuals. And then if you ain't looking at the history of that group, because I believe a lot of domestic violence work I did in the past, and I think to some degree is slightly changing, was based on white folks. Middle-class white folks. The whole idea of power control. If I'm a Black man and don't feel like I have none other than I can beat you up, what am I going to do when I get frustrated? Doesn't make it right. But there's a fine line between an understanding and an excuse. And some folks want to pick and choose. I ain't got time to pick and choose. I ain't got nothing to lose on either side. But when you talk about the relationship with Black men, Black women, even the trauma within that piece is deep, okay? When you talk about, I talk about Black male trauma being selfish, right? It's like, what about me? Because nobody's not feeling like anybody's hearing me, nobody's recognizing me. And when I do say I call the police, and the policemen come down and laugh at me, right? Because I've had clients who, look, this is why I'm gonna do it differently or whatever. Even though the fact is they probably was in toxic relationships. Okay. That whole relationship piece becomes difficult, right? Who's gonna be in power, who's not, right? I mean, if we think about, for example, the slave quarters, and when I say slave quarters, large plantations had slave quarters. There's a lot of white farmers in the South who never had slaves at all. Those are the ones who fought in the Civil War, by the way, which is a whole nother conversation. Folks who had nothing to do with the slave, but if you have slave quarters, there usually was a spokesman. The spokesman usually was a woman, because that male wasn't threatened by her. And a lot of times it was like a mammy type. And she could have been the suckling nurse for his kids, if not him, if he's young. Come into slave quarters, how things are going. She says, master, things are good. We might need some extra grain, right? And so when we look at that kind of the piece, so we got this spokesman, again, usually is a woman or a very old Black man, and saying this particular day, he says, how things going? She said, fine. And then he noticed a little girl who's 10 years old playing with a doll. And he asked her, is she ripe yet? Do we need to know what that means? Now that girl's daddy's in the room. Now she know that this man is feeling like he want to do something to master. But she knows if he does something to master, everybody's pays. So she gives him the look. And anybody in the Black community know what the look is. Okay? Don't you dare. That look continued. Okay? So now the thing about that is over time, a lot of black men resented that look. That the look of don't you dare or having that power over you. Right? And so the thing is that is like these kind of nuances that kind of put these wedges in there, or are trying to live up to what we perceive is the right way in America to live based on what we see Master and his family do, not realizing behind the scenes is nothing like that, right? And this idea of this woman who has been, in his eyes, been given this power. Now, even when they did the work on the Negro problem, one of the things was black women need to stop working outside the house and let black men take a lead. She's been working outside the house forever, so why do I have to back up to partner with him, right? And so this friction has been there. And so working through individual feelings on how to work through that, how to talk about that. I remember there was a interviewer who interviewed me for some of the work I do, and then he said, well, we'd like to have you back on the air, and we want to talk about why black women won't let black men lead. I said, I'm not doing that. What do you mean won't let a black man lead? How do you mean don't let me lead? The lead part starts with me. Let me? No, I'm going to start with me. Now, if being with you makes me uncomfortable because of your skills, right? Then maybe we shouldn't be together, right? So if I don't get a chance to work through my stuff, and the only thing you call me is a perpetrator, that's why when I started this work, specifically with black men, only 30% of the black men will finish a domestic violence course because the people would say, you got to admit that you are a perpetrator, whatever. It's like, dude, send me to jail. Mm-hmm. 'Cause I know how to be punished. Mm-hmm. Black men know how to be punished.
But when we're talking about incorporating these topics into group and thinking about compassionate accountability,
right?
Like part of what came to mind for me, and you were talking about being overly compassionate or overly accountable,
right,
is like being able to understand how these things are part of what led to the violence, but not excusing it, right? And being able to humanize the people that we're working with,
right,
which is part of what was absent before, right? And also speaking of giving people props, like you have been talking about this for a long time,
right?
But the domestic violence community was not down for this for a long time.
Right.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that shift? And I will say, like, DAP was also a piece of the community that wasn't down for talking about it for a little bit of time.
Yeah, and that's because the overall fit, it's like it was like if you stuck your neck out, because there would be people who would stick their neck out for me, that I was coming at it differently, and their neck would get chopped off. I mean, they would get chastised, because you got to understand, domestic violence approaches is one of the few situations that is developed by the victim to persecute the perpetrator. And having power, being a victim from a power position is very nasty, because you can't, if you got a victim, if you're having power from a victim position, how do I confront you without you calling it victim bashing? So a lot of times we do not hold, when we deem one group victim, one group perpetrator without no understanding or explanation, then you end up sometime with a victim who's is in a power position who can be even more nastier than the perpetrator. Because we won't hold them. Because the same thing is like, because again, how do you hold that victim accountable? And there's instances throughout the world that's continuing to happen, and I'm not going to get into all that politics that where you done divide one is this and that, all or nothing. It never works well for human beings.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we've been talking about a lot at DAP as of recent is the intersectionality piece, right? Like even the model is really built based on white women who are victims, right? And often that when we work with women of color and specifically black women, they don't see themselves as a victim, even if they've been through atrocities, right? And so that lens of who gets to determine what victimhood is, and what, and as a black woman, where's the space for me to ever be a victim? And then the piece of the historical trauma of being pinned against each other. And so people often are not understanding why are you backing him up on this? He did this and that, and why don't you want to pursue him in this way? Because of that historical trauma piece of like, hey, I got your back, you got mine. And at the end of the day, it's like, but is that a healthy mechanism to be able to create a community that has more positive outcomes and positive family systems and dynamics?
Yeah, and the interesting thing you said, I got your back, you have mine. I don't know if that's ever been true, fully. I got your back and I might have yours. Okay, because there's always that one who ends up sticking their neck out more. And the big piece around our community is, talking about being pitted against each other. It's the survival piece. So because a lot of what we call culture is trauma response, right? And so we're trying to survive with each other in an environment that doesn't work for the folks who built it. So think about this: if you're talking about being, because we'll talk about the group of African Americans who have American slavery, and I make it real clear, American slavery in their background, because we know slavery is a worldwide kind of thing, but American slavery that doubled and tripled down. Okay, you're talking about a situation where you had to work through that, right? And so how do we relate to each other? Or once slavery is over, what 240 some years of slavery, now you're free. What do you do with that? Okay, you're well away from your original background for the most part. And there's people, and wise people in the community who keep telling you the stories of Africa and that kind of trying to connect that piece. Like what we used to, anybody who's old, seen in Roots, you had that, you could see it later on in that. And so now you're free. And then you're treated everything but free. And then on top of that, to be free, now we have to learn what does free look like? So now I imitate pieces of the perpetrator, but the pieces of perpetrator, only the pieces I see. Do you understand that there's a lot of couples I know, the white males ain't running nothing, and that's part of their trauma and their violence, right? At home. I'm in charge of whatever. Man, you ain't even in charge of yourself. Okay? Trying to imitate that. Do you understand? The way we were talked about affected what we decided to do. Like, why is it that being dressed to the T is so important? Well, when you display a people as raggedy, lazy, and whatever, me coming out the house got to be clean. Now, so the problem is, so much of that ends up being surface and not internal. And surface stuff don't get you far, right? Even in the way you might spend your money, you spend your money on things and don't understand on how to save it. So when we talk about disparities, yeah, it's systematic, but it's also traumatic at the same time. So I have to figure out how to be in this new space of so-called freedom. And so you, like, say, for example, you go out and you do all the things, you take care of your family, you get a job, you get a business, and you do that, and now you still don't want to be bothered with me. Or if I do it so well, and see, people sometimes this is a new thing, the curse of black excellence. You do it so well, it angers me. And the early and see, the thing is, on the other side of that, in our house, we talk about the excellence. So you got this clash. So you got these young people, and we're starting to see more depression among, where we're trying to make the perfect student, the perfect black person, and being told I got to be 10 times better than my white counterpart, and you do all that, and then you wonder why you still end up on the short end of the deal, because now that white person who has their own trauma, and we can dig into their trauma and how it shows up. And the illusion of white supremacy, right? Now you done made me uncomfortable, so now I'm even more mad at you because you don't live up to nothing I was told about you being this. Now, and your perfectness, instead of me being happy for that,
I'm gonna break you.
I'm gonna break you. So all of that piece is part of that trauma. So how do I fit? So we've been trying to fit based on surface stuff. And then if you try to break away from that, then you might get turned on by your own community.
Yeah.
And so, because even when people start dealing with their trauma in the black community, which means that we might have to break away from our family for a while. See, the biggest thing to me, and then we'll see what else question you have.
Yeah.
In the community, and it ties into the domestic violence stuff too, is codependency. Our inability to disconnect. And it starts from that collective ideal. As a survival as a people, we had this collective ideal, and we brag about all that. We're more collective, and whites are more individualistic. Well, there's a place for both, right? So we done spent so much time trying not to be like whites that we hold on to stuff that might not necessarily need to be held on to. It might have had a time. But you think about the collective ideal. Think about the collective ideal in slave quarters. You might have a pedophile in the slave quarters, but you have to work around them. We still do that in community. Not address it, work around it.
Yep.
Right? And so some of that whole kind of thing, trying to collective is more important than the individual, leads to the codependency. How do I disconnect from, negative family stuff without being chastised? Right? And that used to happen to me. I realized at 35 that I had to disconnect myself from the family to find out what was going on with me.
Where do you think we go from here to move towards that healing, right? With all of the historical trauma pieces, life, codependency, how do we start to move as a community, as men, as women, as children, towards healing each one of us individually and as a collective community?
Actually, we start individually, right? And give ourselves permission to heal. And it's real hard because we got to be honest. And when I say be honest, not honest about what the perceived perpetrator have done, but honest about how our response to the perpetrator, right? And again, it's not about guilt. Being honest about what part, you're talking about having not remorse, but for the other person, for the empathy. You're expecting empathy out of somebody who has never been shown any.
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to black men. So how am I supposed to show empathy when nobody's shown me and never allowed me to have any? And I don't even realize if I should have any.
Yeah.
And so it's an individual. So when I do my groups, and we don't talk about the victim. We talk about it once when I interview them. We talk about them. Let's take a look at you. Let's help you in our community. We don't even a lot of what we call culture is tied in so much of our trauma. I have to help them understand what trauma is. Oh, so I've been acting out my trauma but again, it's not about fault. It's about why wouldn't you if you didn't know no better? Instead of that all or nothing, good and bad. Because a lot of the answers are in the gray, and gray is hard for professionals. It's hard for the clients Because even when we talk about compassion accountability, that's really about staff or people working with people challenging themselves. Why am I dealing with this client the way I'm dealing with? What is it I need to check in myself? Why am I uncomfortable with this client when the client has not done anything for me to be uncomfortable about? See, because we always want to put the illness on everybody else and even on the client. And the same thing when it was so difficult for the shelters and stuff to make adjustments when we're talking about black women. Or we're having women from a shelter call me and say, Mr. Simmons, I hear you deal with men, and I'm not trying to get back with the father of my children, but he got demons. That's what she would call it. Because all the men, they will share them demons with the women close to them and well, he if he did it once, he did it again, and he don't feel guilty. Oh, they all feel guilt. Feeling guilt don't mean you can get past doing it again.
Right.
Guilt is real because you done identified all or nothing. If you're guilty, you won't do it again. How do I not do it again when I don't know no better? I don't know how, because you understand, one of the biggest things is as a people, we're very emotional. If I can't manage my emotions, I can't manage my life. Mm-hmm. Even if I'm doing well, my emotions will get me trapped up. Mm-hmm. And this younger group they're emotional, they're all over the place. And 1 minute will do some horrific things, and the next minute be just as sad and angry, but they beat themselves up over and over again because that's the way they're conditioned. Mm-hmm. And when you are not able to show people compassion that you work with, I don't like half of the clients I deal with, but they deserve my compassion. Mm-hmm. And sometimes I would say, when I met you, I didn't like you at all. And they always laugh. Some of them, yeah, I could tell, But again, that honesty goes a lot further.
Yes, it does.
And there's a way to do it, right? No, don't want nobody out there imitating me and get in trouble. It's being honest. Because I think this is what I'm to help with that. Healing is one of the most, in the short term, one of the most painful things under the sun. Mm-hmm. Right? Because now I got to be fully transparent with myself.
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Right? And when you get to a point where you've been fully transparent with yourself, right, and start with you. See, we like dealing with everybody else. Judging everybody else. But one of the most difficult things was that pain, and it's so painful because we are a collective and codependent people. It also means that we might have to take a break from the folks that they say that love us, define me. Mm-hmm. And my brothers and family were upset when I made that choice. And that means not only take a break from my family, but also take a break from the religion I grew up in and all those pieces, because there was trauma all those places. So being brave. In the short term, being brave. And you'll find that when you get on the other side, it's like, I wish I'd have done it sooner.
Yeah. And that feels like a lovely teaching to end on today. Want to tell us where folks can find your book and learn about your conference?
You can find the book on Amazon, and you can go to healingbrothers.com for the conference, or SamuelSimmonsConsulting.com about me and the conference, and also more about the book.
And the book is Just Sam, A Black Man's Journey to Healing. Thank you, Sam Simmons.
You're welcome.
Appreciate all the knowledge.
Thank you. And shout out to, the family connection and all that you've poured into the community. And I get to be the ripple effect of all that pour. And so I hope to continue pouring what's been poured into me.
Right. You've been a good student.